For those of you who watch the MeidasTouch network regularly, you know the importance of law and order on this show. You know, I consider myself to be a law and order Democrat. You also know the importance that I have, whether it's reaching across the aisle to speak with a DeSantis supporter, a Nikki Haley supporter, Republican governors. I think that is important that we have these conversations. You may also know that I live in Los Angeles, and I was recently introduced to someone by the name of Nathan Hochman through a mutual friend. And I'll just give you the way I understood Nathan Hochman's rep. And Nathan had worked as a United States attorney for many years, as a federal prosecutor in the Central District of California. And then he worked in the George W. Bush administration, overseeing the tax division in the United States Department of Justice there. And then he's running for district attorney against George Gascon. He changed his political affiliation from Republican to independent officially when he ran. And so I was just curious, you know, is this a Republican who's running as an independent because it's LA? Even if that's the case, I still want to hear about ideas, because fundamentally what's most important to me is the preservation and protection of our democracy. True law and order is important to me. And, you know, I've heard people say, oh, is Nathan MAGA and this and that? And so I want to understand. So I spoke to Nathan. I reached out. We had a conversation, and I asked him. And so we started to speak privately. And then I said, you know what? This isn't fair. We need to take this conversation publicly, and we just need to share it with the Meidas Mighty and our audience here, so people can see the types of civil conversations that I think are needed in our politics today. And these are some of the best conversations that I love here on the MeidasTouch Network. So without further ado, let me welcome Los Angeles District Attorney candidate Nathan Hochman. Nathan, welcome to the show.
Great to be on. Thank you very much for inviting me.
So Nathan, when I do these interviews, I often see in the comments, they say, but is so-and-so going to be endorsing President Biden? Are they out there supportive of President Biden? After I go through all of these interviews, and I usually save that question for the end, I'm going to kind of reverse the order here and just ask you very directly. Are you endorsing President Biden in the 2024 election over Donald Trump?
So I will be voting for and supporting President Biden in the election over Donald Trump. I did not support and did not vote for Donald Trump in 2016, 2020, and now in 2024. But let me give you quickly, as you and I discussed, my political journey. So I'm 60 years old. I spent the first 20 years as a Democrat. I spent the next 20 years as a centrist Republican. And now I'm a registered independent running for a nonpartisan position where the party affiliation won't even be on the ballot. And I want to tell voters that I'm going to run the DA's office in LA County as an independent, removing politics that George Gascon, our current DA, has inserted into the office, so that the only two things I will be making decisions on are the facts and the law, which for decades are the only two things that DAs have actually made decisions on, not a personal political agenda like George Gascon. I also want to tell your viewers I've been pro-choice my whole life. And again, I view myself as a centrist. I've always been a centrist. I've always voted for the person over the party. And right now, we desperately need someone to take the politics out of the DA's office. Because again, George Gascon has determined before even considering the facts that there are certain crimes and certain criminals that he will not prosecute. Whether it's a juvenile who's stolen just under $950, whether it's someone who used a gun and he won't charge the gun enhancement, they're part of a gang and he won't charge the gang enhancement, or he's reluctant to go after even the 3 strikes cases against the worst of the worst in our system. And again, nothing to do with the facts, nothing to do with the law, but his personal political agenda. That's what I reject. I go back to something I call the hard middle, which is a rejection of the extreme policies on both ends of the spectrum, mass incarceration and George Gascon's decarceration. And the hard middle requires experience. And I have 34 years of criminal justice experience, not just as a prosecutor for 10 years, but as a defense attorney for 24 years. And I will look at the defendant, the defendant's background, the crime committed, the impact on the victim, to determine who the true threats are to our public safety and need to be behind bars, and quite honestly, the ones that aren't. They still have to be held accountable, but very often the nonviolent first-time offender could very well serve their punishment by community service or diversion programs. That's what an experienced prosecutor does. They look at each individual case as opposed to George Gascon, who's adopted extreme blanket policies to decriminalize the criminal justice system.
You know, one of the things that when I sometimes bring on, people who are formerly centrist Republicans, and I ask them the question though, and I say, all right, are you going to be voting? They'll go through all of the dangers of Donald Trump. He's an existential threat to our democracy. Donald Trump talks about being a dictator on day one. Donald Trump's personal behavior. Donald Trump praising Al Capone in speeches. I mean, recently Donald Trump gave a speech about the late, great Hannibal Lecter. They'll go through all of that. And then I'll say, but all right, who are you going to vote for? And they'll go, well, I'm not sure, I'm going to have to consider it. And then it always leaves my viewers kind of wondering, like, okay, you just went through this great interview with a Republican governor or former Republican governor, but then they hesitate to make that final, declarative statement. But look, I don't agree with President Biden on everything. I think that would be very weird if you did. If you agree with anybody on everything, but you're here on the MeidasTouch network. You're saying that you know our audience, although our audience is made up of liberals, progressives, real conservatives, mainstream Republicans, just not a lot of MAGA. But you're confidently saying that you're voting for President Biden. Just walk me through that, because I think that is telling about, you, that you're not shying away from it. And you're just saying, here's where I stand on this issue. So just walk me through that.
Certainly. So it's not a recent conversion that maybe some Republicans might say on your show. I didn't vote for President Trump in 2016, well before I'm running for DA. I didn't vote for him in 2020. I'm not voting for him in 2024. And I'm voting for President Biden in this election. Again, when when Donald Trump goes ahead and says that he wants to use the Department of Justice for retribution on his enemies, that's where he loses me. I mean, he loses me in other aspects too, but on the issues that I'm most focused on now, which is the criminal justice, which is how we create a fair and just system to, again, enact what I call that hard middle, where the true threats to our public safety have to go behind bars, but the ones that aren't still have to be held accountable. But prison might not be the alternative in those situations. Again, I look at Joe Biden's criminal justice reforms and what he has done in actually backing the police and championing victims' causes throughout his tenure as president. And I say that's exactly what I want to do. In fact, I call it the before, during, and after roles of the DA. Before, the DA needs to go out into the schools, middle schools, high schools, bring actual prosecutors and law enforcement into those schools. So you tell the young people before they enter the criminal justice system all the perils about what they're about to face. And you give them a contact person before they actually, sadly, if they enter the system, either as a defendant or a victim. Then you have to actually, during the during period, hold people accountable for their actions. And the after period is also important. If someone goes to prison, the DA has a loud voice to make sure those prisoners are getting skill sets so that when they come out, they're not part of the 50% recidivism rate where they'll be back in jail, half of them, within 2 years. I brought back a program called The Last Mile. And The Last Mile has taught coding skills to prisoners, got them a certificate in coding, helped them get their first job when they get out of prison. And The Last Mile's recidivism rate is close to 0. So again, the DA needs to be on the before, during, and after as far as the role for a DA. And George Gascon has literally failed each one of those roles.
Nathan Hochman, I want to thank you for setting the record straight and for joining us here on the MeidasTouch Network. And I appreciate that when you and I started down the conversation, I was the one who said, you know what? Let's just do this live and let's have the conversation there. And I didn't know where it was going to go, but I'm glad you came on, and I hope to have more of these conversations about the hard middle, about bringing people together, about focusing on law and order. It's just enough of the nonsense. I just want normalcy. I want normalcy. And I appreciate you having this conversation.
Well, thank you very much, because I think the ultimate decision for voters, and again, George Gascon only got 25% of the vote in the primary, which meant 75% of the people rejected him. And they come across all political lines, all demographic lines, all geographic lines in LA County. My job is to unify them and help them answer the question, who will keep them and their families safe for the next 4 years? Because that is the primary job of the DA. George Gascon was given his chance and he failed. I will not fail that mission. And I look to get everyone's vote to replace George Gascon come the November 5th, 2024 general election.
And you didn't shy away from the question when I asked it directly. So appreciate you for joining us. Everybody hit subscribe. We're close to 3 million subscribers here on the MeidasTouch network. And thanks for watching.
Love this video? Make sure you stay up to date on the latest breaking news and all things Meidas by signing up to the MeidasTouch newsletter at MeidasTouch.com/newsletter.